Hi, I'm Nicholas Lodge, Renshaw Brand Ambassador, and in this video I'm going to share with you some of the secrets of using the Renshaw Royal Icing, especially for flooding cookies. This is the Renshaw Royal Icing. This is a pre-made royal icing that is kept at ambient temperature, so room temperature, and this has a 1-year shelf life from manufacturing. When you open this, we recommend you consume and use the product within 2 weeks of opening. You can use it after that date, but not for something to be consumed. So like, for example, for sticking cake dummies together or things that are not going to be eaten. But if you're going to actually use this for things like cookies or biscuits, you need to make sure that you use it within 2 weeks because it does contain egg white. So the royal icing, when you are ready to use this, just going to break the seal onto this. I'm just going to open up the top of this. Once we've opened the top, we're just going to give it a stir. It will look a little bit like almost like a buttercream, and you can see it looks very sort of thick and very dense. I'm just going to start to give this a little stir. So just use a spatula, palette knife. I'm just going to give this a little stir like this. And you can use this straight from the container, and usually what I do is just work from the top and just obviously, you know, go down as far as you need. You don't have to take the whole amount out. But if you were doing a larger quantity of flooding, you could obviously also take this out of this and put it in a larger bowl. Now I'm going to show you how we do flooding on cookies, which is sometimes also known, like in England, as run out work, or in some countries like here in the United States, we typically call this color flow, but it's when we actually flood the cookie. So what I've done is formulated to use this. If you take 100 grams of the royal icing, and of course you could do half of this recipe, 50 grams, you could do 200 grams or 300 grams. This is actually a 400 gram container, okay? And what you're then gonna do is gonna take that, so I already have this scaled out in a digital scale here, so you can see you've got this at 100 grams. This is a high precision scale. This will scale 1/10 of a gram, but you can also do this on a regular kitchen scale as well. This will scale up to 5 kilos or 11 pounds. This will scale 1 pound or 500 grams. So I've got I'm going to zero that out. All right, so I'm going to zero this out. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add to this 6 grams of water. So 6 grams of water is used per 100 grams of royal icing. So that means if you wanted to do the whole container, you could actually put this whole container into a larger bowl and add 24 grams of water, and that will give you the perfect consistency. When you do this, I generally just take some, this is just regular water at room temperature. You don't have to use bottled water, this is just tap water. And then I usually use either a syringe or a pipette. This is a good way just to sort of bring the water up into here. And then what we're going to do here, we're going to start to add. Now, you see this obviously digital scale here. You can see how this is going to go 1.9, 2.1. This will scale 1/10 of a gram. Anyway, so we're going to just go through with this. If you're using the syringe, just to show you that technique, obviously I'm going to come through here. All right, and then when you get sort of like fairly close, I'm at like about 5.4 at the moment. What I like to do is to just finish this off with a fine spray bottle. This is just a small spray bottle here. And what this does, this is just going to give you a little bit, but you see this is at 5 point. I'm just going to just add just obviously let that come down. So 5.9 and at 6 grams, okay? So this is obviously very, you know, obviously a high precision one, but when your digital scale measures 6 grams. So that means we've added 6 grams of water to the 100 grams. Now, the royal icing, the Renshaw Royal Icing is beautiful for flooding because it doesn't really have a lot of air into it. Whereas normally if you were making royal icing from scratch, you'd have a lot of air bubbles, so you have to let it sit. So now what we're going to do is I'm just going to use a spatula or just a small paddle here. And I'm going to now just add the water to the royal icing. Now if you were going to color this, you would take your Pro Gel color. So I recommend like the Pro Gels, these are very concentrated. So if you're doing these for Christmas time, obviously the red or the green, and you could just put a little bit of Pro Gel into here. Because these are very concentrated, we're not adding a lot of extra liquid. Of course, I'm going to just show you this in white, but we're going to now just mix this through. You see how I'm sort of not wanting to sort of overbeat this because I don't really want to incorporate a lot of air. So I'm using more of a rather than do using this technique, which would incorporate air into it. And so this will, so the 6 grams of water we add to the 100 grams of royal icing will give us a perfect flooding consistency. In my classes, what I use here is, if you were doing this just where you didn't actually scale off your royal icing, you generally want the actual trail of the royal icing to disappear on the count of 9 to 10. So you see how you're just going to make sure that you mix the icing in. So if you're just going to take a trail here, so you see you got the trail in here, and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So on 9 to 10, on sort of there, that is going to just disappear, okay? So you're just going to do the trail here, and then go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So the trail has disappeared on that count. Now, once you've got your royal icing made, depending on how many cookies you're doing, you could of course use a plastic bag for this. I generally, in most of my royal icing, I use parchment bags. So this is a 12-inch parchment bag. These are pre-cut triangles. This is 12 inches in size, which is the measurement from here to here. This is a large size bag, all right? So when you make a large size bag, you're going to hold on the longest length of the bag. That is where our point is going to be established. So I'm right-handed, so I hold the end of the parchment paper with my thumb, and I'm going to flip my thumb upside down. So you'll see you're establishing your point on the longest length here. I then change up to my hand here and bring this up over the top, and then just let everything slide together. So you have 3 points in the same vicinity here, and this is how we're going to get the triple steam. And then you're going to make 1 fold and 2 folds, and then I do 2 little tears with my finger, or you could use a pair of scissors. You can also use seller's tape or scotch tape here, but on no account should you ever use a stapler, because that obviously could become dislodged from that. Now if you take that bag, if you cut the large bag in half, that will give you basically 2 medium-sized bags. So exactly the same technique. This will give you a medium-sized bag, which is what I'm going to show you today, because I'm just going to show you flooding 1 cookie. But if you were doing, obviously, say 6 of them, 4 or 6, you could use a larger bag. And if you're using scissors, you just would make 2 little cuts with your scissors here. So you see this little tab is going to then keep the bag from falling apart. And then if you actually fold a medium bag in half again, this will actually give you a small bag here. So these are our piping bags, a large, a medium, and a small bag. And as I said, I'm going to show you in this particular presentation using a medium-sized bag. Now when you fill the bag with royal icing, so once you've got this paddled, and as I explained, because the Renshaw Royal Icing really doesn't have any air into it, you don't really have to let this sit. If you were doing this with a scratch Royal Icing, you generally cover this with a wet towel, and then you'd leave that for about 15-20 minutes to, obviously, for the air to subside and come to the surface. So I'm going to now take some of my royal icing, and you can put this in like a screw top jar. Now the amazing thing about our product, the Renshaw Royal Icing, is because it is a shelf-stable product, if you have any of this left over, you know, around Christmas time when you're doing a lot of cookies. And then once you get the royal icing into here, you're going to fold the bag. So you're going to fold the bag like this. So this ensures that the royal icing isn't going to come out of anywhere other than the end of the bag. But we can put this into like a screw top jar, and we could use this, for example, in 7 days' time. It's still going to be perfect consistency, because if you're using a scratch royal icing, it's going to change a lot. The next day it would start to fall back on itself. So I'm just going to cover this with a wet towel here, so I can just keep that ready to use. Now when you're doing, when we're doing flooding cookies, you can do a very basic flooding. That is that we're actually going to just cut the end of this bag comparable to about a number 2 piping tip or piping tube, and then I'm going to actually outline with this soft icing, and then I will flood in. So I'm just going to take my scissors here now. I'm just going to cut this off. So it would be about comparable to about a number 2 size. If you were doing like a number 2 line, this would be about the size of a number 2 piping tip, okay? Usually when I'm doing cookies, I'm going to put them onto a turntable. So you can put this on a little small turntable. This is actually just like a little mini turntable. This is made specifically for cookies and cupcakes, but you can use a small turntable like this as well. And this is just, of course, your cookie could be bigger than this. So if you're doing a larger cookie, then this is actually about 3 inches across, about 7.5 centimeters. And so if I was going to do this with, for example, a larger shortbread cookie or a ginger cookie, I could use this on. This is obviously the McVitie's, which is an English biscuit. This is also really good to practice on for those who haven't done a lot of flooding, because it has these little, when they bake these little holes here, this is a good to use as a guide. So anyway, when you're flooding, all right, so when we're flooding, we're going to outline here. So you're just going to just sort of start to rotate the cookie, and you see how I'm actually using my line here, that I'm using the little dots around the edge here as my guide. So you just would flood in like this. Now sometimes we flood closer to the edge, sometimes we will flood a little bit in, depending what you're doing. And then usually what you're going to do is, if you are doing your cookie, and then I actually use this same amount of icing, and now what I'm going to do is going to go around here, and you see how I'm just flooding in here. Now if you were doing this with you'll hear little pops, all right? And the reason that I haven't cut a big hole off the end is that if you cut a big hole off the end, all of the little air bubbles that are still in the icing, which is not many in the Renshaw icing, will actually just go straight into the icing. Whereas when you hear the little pop, 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 that little pop, pop, pop is the royal icing is dissipating. The little air bubbles are dissipating before they come out to here. Now a lot of cookie artists use a scribe needle, and a lot of times that is used because if you have air bubbles, but you see pretty much this royal icing doesn't have any air bubbles in it. So a lot of cookie artists use this, but this is a good way. If you do get an air bubble, you can use this. I personally prefer to use a paintbrush. All right, and so what I'm going to do here is going to use my paintbrush here, and I'm just brushing my royal icing. So this is a traditional way of course, doing a cookie. And of course, you can put the icing on a little thicker, and if you have any little areas, you can just sort of fill that in. And just going to just bring this in. And this will fill in the, as I said, this will fill in the flood in. Okay, so this is how we flood on the cookie. Now, if you were doing a cookie, for example, that has a little bit more sort of like a design or like lines on it. So for example, this is like a birdhouse cookie. This is a shortbread cookie, a birdhouse. Usually there, it is better to actually use a number 2 piping tip. So what you would do there is you take a number 2 tip, medium bag. I drop my number 2. When you cut off the end of the bag, you always want to cut off enough, so approximately half of the piping tip should come out of the bag. Half of the piping nozzle or piping tip. So this ensures that the icing tip will sit nice and snugly into the bag there. You see there's no gap down the side. If you only cut off a little bit, what's going to happen is it's going to, you'll find you'll end up with the icing coming out the back. So when you're using the icing to put into a piping bag, normally what I do is just put a little bit of icing, and I generally just paddle this on my table. So I'm just going to put this straight onto my table. This is just out of the pot. And when you're doing just piping, you know, with a shell tip, like if you're using a shell tip, or you can do that, you're just going to just paddle this. And as you paddle this, will break down the icing a little bit, but also make sure it gets rid of any air that's in here. Now when you're doing finer piping, if you're going to be, for example, doing this with a smaller, you could just give it one little tiny spray of water, all right, just a little tiny bit of water. But generally if you were using this, for example, for like a number 2 or a 43, then you're going to put your icing into your bag, and then I would just again fold the bag over. Going to roll the top of this up. Just going to just clean up my icing here. Just make sure you keep the icing covered with, as I said, a damp towel, washcloth or flannel. That will just ensure that that stops it. So you see, if you were going to sort of then do something like your outline your cookie here, This means that when you're outlining, you're just going to outline. This, of course, gives you a little bit more control when you're especially going to outline and circles and things like that. So sometimes you would use just the flood-in icing to outline and then flood in. Other times you're going to use normal consistency icing and then you will fill in. When I did, for example, this cookie here, this has got a scalloped edge. This I actually outlined with the number 2, because when we do that cookie, we're wanting to, when we do that, you're actually going to use your royal icing here. You see how I'm going to then just going to actually follow. So I'm using a drawing technique here. So you see how I actually draw around the edge, and then I would then flood that in. Now once we've got your, once we have your cookies flooded, now icing is hygroscopic. That means it absorbs moisture from the atmosphere. And basically the quicker you can dry the surface of the royal icing, the shinier it will become. If you look at these cookies, you see how they have this amazing, beautiful, like really, really shiny surface to them. And how I've done that is I use a food dehydrator. So here is the food dehydrator. I'm going to take the lid off of this. This particular brand, the Excalibur, has got 5 sheets in here. So this will actually, you can actually fit this size cookie, you can do 18 on a sheet. And so we would just put this into the food dehydrator. And this will go in the food dehydrator. This is set on 115, which is 46 degrees centigrade. That's just the lowest setting. And what that's going to do is just going to sort of, the warm air will just dry off the surface of the royal icing. So generally I would leave it into here for about 90 minutes to 2 hours, and they would then be dry enough to then decorate. So this one is a dry one I made earlier on, and you can see how you're going to get this beautiful, like a sort of really shiny finish. If you don't have a food dehydrator, another option you could use is use like a desk lamp, just like an angle poised desk lamp with a 60-watt light bulb. Just have this about 12 inches away from the cookies, and what that will do, that will dry the surface off quickly, so you'll establish this beautiful sheen. Because especially if it was raining the day you flooded your cookies and they take a long time to dry, they will dry very dull. Now once you've got your cookies made, you can of course decorate these in different ways. So for example here, I'm just going to do like a little simple shell around the outside of this. So I'm just going to do just this little small shell with the number 2, so like a little shell or a bead border here. And then just showing you how to use the icing with color. If you were going to color the royal icing, I'm going to just take a little bit of icing here. Just would take just a little bit of the icing that I need. And then when you use the Pro Gels, they're very concentrated. And with the Pro Gel here, I have the red. So generally what I would do here is I would just take just a little bit of, with a toothpick. So just going to squeeze out some of the Pro Gel here. I'm just going to put a little bit of that into the, there we go, into here. Now with the red, the color will intensify. You want to sort of make it almost like a sort of a brick red color, and it will become darker. Some colors will intensify, especially red. Okay, just needs a little bit more. But see, this isn't really going to change the consistency of the icing much. And if you were going to, for example, you leave this icing white, I would add a little bit of water to it. But see, the little bit of gel here will obviously give you this beautiful red and this color. But see, this technique of working on the table is much more efficient than using a bowl or a container, because what it means is, you see, you paddle the icing, you're going to distribute the color through perfectly, but also what's going to happen is you're not going to get any air bubbles into here. And then you would take this and you put this into your little piping bag with, for example, like a number 1 piping tip, whatever you're going to use. Okay, just going to put this to one side. Okay, I'm just going to just clean up my, but this makes cleanup very, very easily as well. You can also do that on a little scraper or on a little small silicone mat. Something I use a lot are plastic bags like this. This is a plastic bag. This has a plastic little nozzle or tip. And I have used a little, so this means this royal icing, for example, over say a 2-week period of cookie decorating around Christmas or the holidays, you could actually make up a bag of red, a bag of black, a bag of green, a bag of orange for carrot noses on snowmen, for example. And then this has got a small end on it. It's got a small, it's comparable to about a #1 piping tip size, but you can also cut the end of this bigger with a pair of scissors. And then what I've done here is I've just put the little elastic band on the end here. When I'm not using it, I would just put the little cap on here, and that means I could just leave this on my counter for 2 weeks, and I could use this royal icing. And this is what's amazing about the product, because normal royal icing, if I was making royal icing from scratch, coloring it red, by tomorrow that icing would have started to separate. And then you just would use this to obviously write on your cookies. So I've just done Happy Holiday. And that's on the end there. You see, I just would put the end on. So for little accent decoration, this works wonderful. Using also the pens, like for example, these are the double-ended food art pens. These food art pens, these come in different colors. And so you can use these. One end is like a regular food art pen. So if you feel more comfortable, you could also use this to do your inscription. And the other end here is going to have a fine end on there. And this is going to be used for obviously doing fine detail. And so you could use this, for example, to do things like some pine needles. And then, of course, you could just finish this off with some little red berries here. So you could also use like nonpareils or dragées there and things. But it just gives you a little bit of a idea of how you would use the royal icing for holiday cookie decorating. So happy holidays, and as I said, I hope you'll have fun using the Renshaw Royal Icing, whether it's at Christmas or any other time of the year. This has been Nicholas Lodge. Thank you for being here, and happy decorating. Here's an additional way of flooding, that is a glaze. In countries like Germany, on gingerbread cookies, often they just have a thin royal icing glaze. So here I've got a little dish with an elastic band on it. All right, so the little elastic band will, you'll see what I do with this. So you're just going to take your flooding icing just as I did, and then you're just going to put your cookie into the royal icing like this, and then you're just going to just use the band here just to sort of take off some of the icing here. You see what this is going to do? This is going to just give you this glazing, and then you can just use your little small spatula here just to go over the top of this. Now this is usually not going to be as smooth as a flooding icing, but it will just have a thin royal icing glaze. So a lot of bakeries do this for speed, so they actually would dip their cookies, and this is just an alternative you could use. But I said on certain cookies that works very well, so when that's finished you're going to have a sort of just a thinner coating of royal icing.